This is the Cloud Ace podcast, bringing you the latest in cloud security through captivating chats with fascinating cybersecurity experts who are leaving their mark on the industry. Cloud Ace is brought to you by the SANS Institute and hosted by SANS certified instructor Brandon Evans. And now, prepare for departure. We are clear for takeoff. Here's your captain, Brandon Evans.
Hey everyone, welcome. Today we have Aaron Hutson, who has worked as a cloud security analyst, engineer, and SysAdmin for a variety of different organizations. Notably, he has worked on the cloud team of DISA, or the Defense Information System Agency. Now he works as a cloud security consultant, educator, and is also pursuing his doctorate in IT. So, hey Aaron, how you doing today?
I'm doing quite well, sir. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Would you like to go into a little bit more depth about your intro?
Sure. So I guess I didn't really get into cloud until about, let's say 2015. Before that, I was just working as a sysadmin for a defense contractor doing non-cloud related things. And, going through education at the time, I was actually working on my cybersecurity degree. And one of the classes that came up was cloud computing. So I started taking an interest in cloud at that point. And one thing I've learned is that it's a very wide field. It's still new to a lot of people, but it's one that was interesting, and it was heavily related to cybersecurity, because when you have something new that comes up in the IT industry, such as cloud, there's going to be a lot of security implications with it. So that's something that, piqued my interest. And from then on, as I started learning more, I was actually very anti-cloud at first. So one thing I've learned over the years, not to fast forward too much, but one thing I've learned over the years is that you have a few different groups of people. You'll have a group that doesn't really care anything at all about their data. Is it in the cloud? Is it at home? Is it, sitting down on the street somewhere? No one cares. You also have the type like me who's paranoid. And at first, we don't want our data on the cloud. We want full control over it. Putting things out in the cloud is scary. And then you also have a group that, put everything in the cloud, will fix all of our problems. So there's a few different lines of thinking that are involved in all this. But not to get too sidetracked, my point is, though, that I started to gain more interest in cloud. So I was shifting away from being sort of anti-cloud into, maybe I want to learn a little more about this.
Certainly. And I think that it takes a while to get that mindset. You mentioned that you got into cloud in 2015. That's actually pretty long time, considering that, modern cloud services really came out in 2006. And it's really hard to wrap your head around giving all this data to a third party. A lot of people are really paranoid about that, like you mentioned. I personally, in my personal life, don't care that much about my own data. I find it to be just not something that really affects me that much, but I really do care about the security of my customers' data and anybody who's using any applications that I support's data. And like you said, it's such a bizarre idea to entrust this to this third party.
Oh, absolutely. And when you're in the security field, it actually becomes pretty important, because more people are shifting towards the cloud. So at that point, it goes from a fear of the cloud to understanding it. How do we make this work in a modern security environment? So as I was learning more about the cloud and about cybersecurity in general, about 2017, mid 2017 is when I got a phone call from a DISA contractor saying, "Hey, we have a systems engineer job open on this cloud project." And the call evolved from there. Initially, I'm thinking, I'm still not fully on board the cloud, but this might actually be a good opportunity to learn about cloud, because this was still new to not only myself, but again, it was new to government. It's still kind of new to government as well. There's a lot to understand. But I ended up making a decision to get on board to see what I could learn, as well as to get some good hands-on experience, that sort of thing. And as I got more involved into it, I noticed the cloud isn't so scary after all. There's definitely caveats. It's not a magical, throw all my data up there and I'm secure. It obviously doesn't work that way. But I'm a big fan of education, so learning all these new things was very important to me. It was also awesome. Yeah, so since then I've learned a lot of different interesting things within clouds, different cloud environments. I'm primarily more geared towards Amazon Web Services, but there are other providers out there like Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, Oracle, Salesforce. There's all sorts of different providers, so that's another thing to keep in mind. Each provider is going to have their own different technologies and standards and whatnot. But
So
yeah,
at a high level, what really won you over? I know you said that you were skeptical of the cloud, you were even anti-cloud. Can you give us some insight into what won you over to the side of saying, you know what, the cloud's not perfect, but it's something that we have to use in some cases?
the selfish part of me is going to say I just started to like it. This is easy to use. It's great. I don't have to worry about physical infrastructure and all that. It sort of lets you become lazier, so to speak. So that kind of helped things out. But I think another thing was just being able to learn a lot of new things associated with it, how this technology works, how security is woven into it, or what gaps need to be filled. It's just something that really started to pique my interest. So again, I went from the anti-cloud to, okay, cloud is cool. I like it. I'm still going to worry a little bit because I know there's still security implications, but okay, I'm fine with this. And when you learn about the different things that cloud providers do, so without getting too involved here, you have two different things: security of the cloud and security in the cloud. When you think of the cloud at its broadest definition, things like physical infrastructure. So Amazon, for example, will be responsible for their infrastructure and the security of that. When we're talking about security in the cloud, that's typically what the customer is responsible for as far as securing your data is concerned. So Amazon can give you a virtual machine service, their EC2 service, but they're not responsible for what you do with that service. They're not responsible for making sure your virtual machines are kept up to date. So that in itself is one thing that we need to worry about as security professionals. And it just spirals from there. There's just so many different things within cloud that security touches, and it just starts to become quite interesting. And there's this rabbit hole that you start traveling down to learn more. So that's really what's piqued my interest.
Certainly. And you mentioned how part of the appeal of cloud security is to be lazy, that you can use these tools to make your job easier. A lot of people think, and in other contexts, laziness, it's not a virtue. But in the context of IT and security, it kind of is a virtue because it allows you to find out what things are really valuable for us to do and what things are time wasters, what things can be automated, what things can not be automated, then I want to really focus my time on. And you mentioned keeping your VMs up to date, right? In the cloud, that is so much easier to do, both in EC2, but especially in containers and serverless environments. So in a way, laziness is actually good, wouldn't you say?
Yes. It depends on your perspective. So if you're a manager, so to speak, you hear laziness and you're thinking, "Oh, we don't want this." But when you're an administrator, engineer, you start to realize that you can, like you said, automate some of these processes, free up your time to do other things that require your attention. Another huge thing that automation does is it takes human error out of the equation. So that's a big deal in of itself, as long as the automation is properly set up and configured without human error getting involved in that, right?
Yeah, you can't eliminate human error altogether, but it's certainly easier to get it right once, have a peer review process, and then know that it's going to work the same way every time versus repeating the same process over and over again and worrying, did I check that box? Did I select the wrong item in that drop down? Absolutely.
Yep. Or did I change that password? I don't remember. Well, if it's automated, if you're using a password solution like Microsoft Labs, for example, or even if you're trying to just use a scripted GPU or whatnot, you're fine. You don't have to worry about making that mistake. So automation definitely helps eliminate a lot of human error, and it helps close gaps as well.
Absolutely. Now, as you've mentioned, you've had a career longer than your involvement in the cloud. Can you share with us a little bit about what concepts translated perfectly between on-prem and cloud, as well as instances in which you had to break your habits in order to succeed in this new environment?
Okay, that's actually a very good question. So I had initially started out, as far as on-prem goes, I was more involved with like VMware and such. So I guess you could say I was already pretty acclimated with virtual environment before I got into cloud, which is a good thing. I know a lot of people don't have that privilege. Everything's still physical, or they just don't have a whole lot of virtual infrastructure to manage. So there could be quite a learning curve when shifting from on-prem to cloud in that regards. For me, though, I had an experience with virtualization, so it wasn't a huge thing. It was almost a direct translation, other than, say, the name of the service and the way you manage it. Now, as far as on-prem goes, you might have heard something called, was it hard shell with the GUI center? That's how a lot of people treat their on-prem networks. You have this very hard perimeter. You try to keep the bad guys out as much as you can. Once they get in, though, it's free reign. There's no more defenses internally, or maybe there's maybe an IDS or an IPS inside, but it's doing nothing. In that regard, you could have file systems open to everyone within internal networks. So let's say you have a file share where you have a lot of company data, maybe engineering plans, things of that nature. If you're loosey-goosey like that on the cloud, you could potentially expose your data not just to everyone within your internal network, but you could expose it to the entire world as well. So in mentioning that, there's actually been a lot of different breaches that involve that sort of situation. A lot of you may have heard of a service called S3, Amazon S3. That's the simple storage service. In a nutshell, it's just a service where you can store a lot of files, data objects. You can even host static websites from there if you wanted to. But when they're configured incorrectly, and that is when the public can read them, when the public can access an S3 bucket that holds all of your data, it's game over. You've been breached at that point. So there are things that people will do on-prem, like I was saying. You have that soft GUI center. Hey, my files are open to everyone and on the internal network, but it's okay because the perimeter is hardened. You don't get that kind of luxury on the cloud. So that's just another thing to keep in mind.
You don't get that luxury by default. You can do the same things in the cloud if you're really determined to. But if you're the kind of organization that's going to put a lot of information on a public bucket, are you really the kind of organization that's going to lock down your cloud network?
Right.
Seems unlikely to me.
So security needs to be baked in a company's culture, and that is something that I have observed at different places in the past where no one cares. Everyone has domain admin by default, just to make the system admin's job easier. That sort of thing. So there has to be a security mindset within an organization to ensure that you're not going to leak all of your data to the public on the cloud. But I only mention that because I just want to sort of stress that you can be, worry-free in an internal network to an extent, but if you can't always think like that when you go to the cloud. You have to be careful because you could be exposing your data to more than just, all of your employees or visitors, but again, the entire world. So that's why I bring that up.
Absolutely. Now, you've mentioned in your experience, you've worked as a sysadmin, both on-prem and in the cloud. Can you share with us how DevOps has impacted your role? Because a lot of people say, sysadmin, they had their time in the sun, and now DevOps is really disrupting that space. Are you finding that more and more sysadmins are really picking up DevOps practices, or do you think there's a lot of hype there that maybe people are overblowing?
So when I hear DevOps, it's kind of hard to answer that question because different people have different meanings for that term. It's a buzzword that gets thrown around whenever a lot of people will have the chance to do so. So the definition gets muddied. a lot of people will think of DevOps as, automating solutions, developing the solutions and putting them into operation. So developing like like code that will auto deploy patches to a system and take care of that sort of thing. You might even consider, Amazon Lambda to be kind of a DevOps service, depending on your perspective. That's where you can upload Python code to execute different functions that you will like. Now, from a developer perspective, DevOps essentially means, building code, pushing it out, deploying it to systems continuously, and that sort of thing through a continuous integration and delivery pipeline. So it just really depends on what your definition of DevOps is. I know it's not a very clear answer, but it doesn't seem like there's a single solid definition for that word. So it's a little murky with what sysadmins do from that perspective. What one sysadmin thinks is DevOps, another will say, no, you're just pressing a few buttons and that's it. So it's a little tricky to answer that.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you mentioned that there's a lot of buzzwords in technology. That's outrageous. In my day job, I'm just a blockchain, AI, ML, DevOps, serverless engineer architect. Very clear as mud right there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
and then you have DevSecOps now, and then there's probably going to be. I've even heard AI SecOps before, so it's just lots of buzzwords coming out.
Blockchain SecOps is definitely the future. All those other paradigms are really out of date. But I think when people talk about DevOps in the best of organizations, let's say, it's what you got to where developers are doing their own deployments. They're managing more of this infrastructure. Do you think that has impacted security positively, negatively? And where do people who specialize in system administration come in to ensure that these things are done properly?
Sure. So from that perspective, it's scary. Developers quite often don't really have a reputation of being very secure with their coding or things of that nature. You want to get the job done, but maybe not necessarily with security in mind. I'm not saying that's with everyone, of course. From my observations, that seems to be something a lot of people think, at the very least.
Yeah, and it's not just about care. It's also about they have competing priorities. They're required to get things done on time. And oftentimes, speaking as a developer myself, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what questions we have to ask in the first place.
Correct. Like take a web application, for example. Developer may code a basic login form, never have heard of SQL injection before. So they code an application, a login form. They don't check for a malformed input into that form, and now their app is vulnerable to SQL injection attack. I'm not saying that's a fault of their own. Like you said, training is actually a huge deal, and that's why I'm a little worried when developers get involved. Is have they had the training to do secure coding practices? Now, when you have a developer create code and push it, maybe you have an approval process that requires a manual review of that code or of manual review of the functionality or things like that. So that's somewhere where a sysadmin could maybe step in, take a test instance, deploy the application or the code or whatnot to that instance, see how it works. Maybe they're a little security minded and can try a few things on themselves, or if they're allowed to use any kind of pen testing tools, which is probably out of the scope of a sysadmin's job, but some people will. But I think as long as you have a manual review process in there that checks, get another set of eyes on this, I think you eliminate security problems quite a bit. And then that process, that DevOps process where a developer writes code, deploys, and off it goes, I think that becomes a lot less scary at that point, as long as there's someone else looking at it. Or even if there's an automated product, you have commercial products out there that will do static code analysis as well to check for any vulnerabilities and such. So I think as long as you're baking security into the culture of the organization, I think you eliminate a lot of problems that way. I guess that's what I'm getting at the end.
Hi, I'm Serge Borso, author of SANS Sec 388, Introduction to Cloud Computing and Security. Start your journey into cloud security here. If you are in a role that requires the ability to communicate about cloud computing, understand and use industry terminology, and grasp the basics of cloud security, Sec 388, Introduction to Cloud Computing and Security is the course for you. Leaders of cloud technical teams, C-suite and board members, and those just entering the industry can greatly benefit from this course. Sec 388 provides students with the knowledge needed to confidently speak to modern cybersecurity issues brought on by the cloud and become well-versed with applicable terminology. Students won't just learn about cloud security, but about the how and the what behind the critical cloud security topics impacting businesses today. Learn more at sans.org/sec388.
Absolutely. And I think your point about the review process is so important because you're always going to have subject matter experts. You're not going to have everyone equally knowledgeable about development, operations, security, AI, serverless, ML, all the things we mentioned before. I feel like the industry just wants to give people more responsibilities and not realize that everybody has their own talents at the end of the day. So even though people are doing DevOps, we need operations and their expertise in order to guide folks. And the same thing is true about security. So I'm very much with you there. Now, I know there's limitations to what you can talk about when it comes to government, but I'd be remiss if I didn't try to get you to talk just a little bit more about how this all plays within that much higher pressure, higher stakes world. What things work in the cloud for government? What things don't work? And how have you found the government's eagerness to adopt new cloud services or lack thereof?
So, from the perspective of a government project, there's a lot of things you need to keep in mind. Of course, there's the cloud SRG out there that you need to comply with. There's also various different STIGs as well. Does a cloud service have a STIG, a security technical implementation guide? Has the agency even adopted a given cloud service? Is this cloud service even available on the platform to begin with that we're using? So take Amazon, for example. There's a big difference between Amazon GovCloud and commercial as far as different services that are available. I can't name any off the top of my head. Generally speaking, though, if there's a let's say there's a commercial service that is new to the commercial side, you probably won't find on GovCloud for quite a while.
And what's really unfortunate about that is sometimes the services are security and compliance oriented. So now people in the government are trying to secure their stuff and they're not given the tools to do that because of security.
That's a good point. And in those cases, then maybe you can try to fill the gap using, I wouldn't say an on-prem solution, maybe more of a traditional solution that you deploy into the cloud. I will most certainly say, though, that things, it's the adoption is it's a little slow, but it's to be expected because everyone starts somewhere, right? And you gotta get your feet wet before you get deeper into the pool. So that's essentially what it comes down to as far as that goes.
What's really unfortunate, like you mentioned, is that people are going to deploy more traditional services as a result, but have they gotten the same level of scrutiny as these new AWS services? Maybe yes, maybe no. But because there's the perspective of it being cloud, people are way more skeptical, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, so I guess the concern there is if you try to shoehorn a traditional product into the cloud, is it going to work as well? I would say, from experience, if the product it supports virtualization quite well on its own, so that let's say it runs on an on-prem VMware workload, if you can make that happen, you can make it work in the cloud. I'm not saying it'll be as efficient, or I'm not saying it'll be worse, but you can fill in the gaps when you need to. But as far as like the cloud native services and such, certainly you like to be able to use more of those because if Amazon offers you a security service for their cloud, they probably know the ins and outs of what's going on a little bit better than a traditional provider. Maybe. I can't state that with any certainty, but I definitely understand where you're coming from with that statement.
Yeah, I mean, what can we really state with certainty in IT in general, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What can we actually say with certainty? Yeah, of course, they should theoretically have more insight than these other services, but who knows? And one of my favorite things to say when I'm teaching my course Sec 510 on the various different cloud providers is that AWS says, or has said in the past, that they have hundreds of fully fledged services. And that's just kind of their opinion, right? Some services are significantly more baked than others. And as a result, some of them are built by the most brilliant people in their organization, and some are just, how do they even make it into this platform?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. There has to be a lot of complexity there. And that is, and when you think about that, that is a reason, or a perfectly valid reason someone could use for why they may not want to adopt a new service so quickly. Because service needs to be vetted. If it's new, it's probably going to have issues right off the bat. I mean, I'm sure you're aware as a developer, something new is going to have bugs. So you don't want
something old is going to have bugs too. It's definitely not just new things.
Very true. That's very true. But yeah, you want to make sure a service has been properly vetted first. Make sure it's compliant with various NIST controls. 853 is a huge thing as far as government goes. So it's not necessarily a fact or a matter of, hey, there's this new scary service out there, we don't want to use it because we're set in our ways. It's more of a, okay, there's this new service out there. Does Amazon even have it available for us to use yet? If so, we need to vet it. Has it been FedRAMP authorized? If so, awesome. But does it also comply with our own controls that we have as well? So there's definitely an adoption process that goes on in government. Government is definitely adopting cloud, right? They have this huge push towards it. It's just a matter of, with all the various types of data that different agencies have, you just got to be really sure. And that the complexity of different cloud services, that what exactly is going on with them, when there's that level of uncertainty, it's just hard to adopt something right away.
Absolutely. Now, as if you weren't busy enough, in addition to everything that you've done in this field and are currently doing in this field, you're also an educator. I see that you're an adjunct faculty member for 2 different schools in Maryland. And I also see that part of the curriculum covers AWS. You want to share a little bit about what you teach and how receptive, let's say, the next generation of IT is to cloud?
Sure. So it's essentially, I'm teaching, I wouldn't say, or I guess you could say it's more of like a foundational course for cloud to get students familiar with it. A lot of students are coming into this course having never heard of cloud. Maybe they're interested, or maybe they're just taking a course because they're required to. Yeah, that's fine too. Some of those students, you'll find at the end of the course, were actually glad that they were required to take it because they learned something new, and it's going to help them quite a bit in their career path. But in the course that I doing right now, students are exposed to Amazon and Azure through different labs that are offered through different providers. Azure Security is one of them. Amazon, they're getting familiar with EC2, EBS, those sorts of things. So it's a foundational course, but it does help open eyes up to students as to what the cloud actually is. I mean, there's so many different definitions of what cloud is when they come into the course, but when they come out, they have much more aligned definitions to what cloud is.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mention that the course primarily or exclusively focuses on AWS and Azure, when now we have 3 players in this space. So shameless plug, that's one of the reasons why I'm very proud to have authored with Eric Johnson, Sec 510, Public Cloud Security, AWS, Azure, and GCP, because hey, Google Cloud is growing in popularity. And as we are growing in popularity, as they are growing in popularity, people need to learn about the security implications, because sometimes Google is even harder to secure than the other providers. So have you worked with Google at all? I know that you said that your main focus has been AWS.
At some point, I do intend on getting more involved with GCP. There's a lot to take up when you get started with a cloud provider. So when I was hired on as the my first cloud role, that was AWS. So I got involved in AWS, focused on that. Azure came along a little bit as well, but primarily it was AWS. So I've kind of stuck with that, and they just have more and more things coming out. So it's difficult to keep on top of everything with different providers. You may have heard the term jack of all trades, master of none. That's something I try not to be, but I don't think that's really going to be possible, because, as you said, there's new players on the field, and who knows, there's going to be even more players coming out, in the future as well. So it's a lot to keep on top of for sure. But personally, I have not really delved much into GCP quite yet. That'll come up in the future, though.
And that's what's terrifying, is you mentioned you don't want to be a jack of all trades, master of none. But even in one cloud provider, it's so easy to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. Like, no one knows every single service in AWS. And, maybe you can memorize the names of them all. There's a great YouTube video, if you haven't seen it, from my friend Forrest Brazil, which is like a song that he did with all of the AWS services. And Forrest knows his stuff, and he's also a very talented musician. But no one knows how to secure all these different services, even if you know all of their names.
Yep.
It's just impossible. But like you mentioned, you're going to be learning that in the future. And educators like myself, like you, we're also trying to continuously learn, because there's just so much to learn. You cannot know it all. And I wanted to mention one of your recent accolades. I see that, I mentioned ML a couple times here, machine learning, kind of in a joking manner, because it's a kind of a buzzword. But you actually have gotten a certification in machine learning from AWS. Would you like to share a little bit about what you learned in that certification and how those learnings could be applied to security?
Whew. Okay. So that was, the AI stuff is a lot to take in. I guess as far as from a security perspective.
Well, I'll give you an example of maybe one practical application, and maybe this will help spark some ideas about how you would implement it. Is at SANS, we actually have a applied machine learning course that talks about how to use machine learning to look at packets and do packet analysis to find potential indicators of compromise, by giving a lot of data to this model and saying, hey, this is a real compromise, this is not a real compromise. You're able to program an application that would be able to, with a certain level of accuracy, protect what is a real indicator of compromise. Now, that's all I understand at a high level. I am no ML AI expert. I've taken one class on it 10 years ago, and I forgot basically all of it. But what do you think about that usage of ML for security?
Sure. So for like anomaly detection, I guess that'll be what you're aiming for there. So a lot of technology, sort of already does that. IDS and IPS is they may not call it AI or ML learning, but they're kind of doing it already. But I would say, as AI evolves, as let's say more advanced algorithms come about. I know Amazon, they have their random cut forest algorithm they like to use. I would say that there's probably going to be, I'm not sure it'll be sooner rather than later, but there's probably going to be a pretty good implication as far as security goes, because you have right now, of course, you have security analysts who will scour logs looking for attack patterns, things of that nature. I think there's a good use case for where AI could step in there and take a huge load off of the analysts, or I wouldn't necessarily say replace them, because I'm just of the mindset that you should always have at least someone looking over the final results, right?
Exactly. And that gets back to what you were talking about earlier, is that there will always be that manual review process. But automation is a vehicle to free up resources to do the more important, harder to automate work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a place, again, where AI or ML could come in and, of course, step in, help out average human beings quite a bit as far as that's concerned. So I personally do see that becoming more and more involved as time goes on. Not a matter if, it's more a matter of when.
Absolutely. Now, unfortunately, we have to wrap up shortly, but just to wrap up in terms of continuous education, I see that you're currently studying for a pen test certification. And I really liked the post that you made about this recently, where you mentioned that as a defender, it was mind-blowing to see how easy it can be to perform an attack. Can you delve into some more examples of an attack that you are learning how to perform for this certification that you've heard of theoretically, but just could not believe how easy it was in practice?
Yeah, sure. So taking over an Active Directory domain through a simple exploit on a web application that allows SQL injection. So you could always read, an attacker could gain an elevated shell on a compromised web server and do X, Y, and Z with that. You can read all about how someone can always find a way to steal credentials from a domain admin and take over an entire Active Directory domain. Of course, once you do that, you have keys to the kingdom. So you can read all about that, but when you go and actually do it, when you can see how something so tiny, which is a simple SQL injection attack that was able to dump a password for a web application user, or allow you to get which ultimately spirals into you being able to use those creds to get a shell, privilege escalation, grab cache credentials off a machine, that sort of thing. Once you actually start doing that, once you grab those credentials, find out how you can actually leverage them yourself, maybe not necessarily even crack any hashes, just reuse them to gain privileges. It just becomes, I wouldn't say mind-blowing, but it kind of just leaves you in awe. You've read about this, but you didn't realize how simple it can be from just one or two tiny misconfigurations. I say that from the context of both on-premise networks, but also in cloud. An insecure system that's on-prem is going to be insecure in the cloud as well. Just because you put something in the cloud does not make it secure. I know a lot of people, again, will think, if I put a VM in the cloud, it'll be secure by default. No, it won't. You have to, take things in your own hands.
It can be worse in some cases.
It can be, absolutely. So it's just amazing when you actually do the things yourself. As a blue teamer, again, as a defender, you read how to do something and you deploy the countermeasure to stop an attack. That's great. And then again, there's nothing wrong with that. But when you gain the experience of doing it yourself, like carrying out the actual attack to get a better perspective, you get a better perspective, but then you're just left just thinking, wow, this actually is a thing. Now, not only do I better understand what's going on here, but wow, that's what it comes down to. It's quite interesting.
Yes, for me, it was just mind-blowing as well, and also terrifying, and also incredibly, incredibly cool. I'm a firm believer that it's harder to build things and defend things than it is to break things down. That being said, people who are experts in pen tests, they are able to do these incredible techniques that I would never even consider using to break down systems. But unfortunately, so many people get the basics wrong that a lot of these low-level attackers or script kiddies can just break into resources, especially within the cloud. But I think that it's awesome to think red and act blue, to understand where the red team is coming from, where the criminals are coming from in order to deploy those active countermeasures.
Absolutely, I will agree with you on that. And then the other, other part of that is it's a lot cheaper, it's a lot simpler to build your infrastructure out with security in mind from the very beginning. Because if you don't, you're going to have a lot of holes open that you've lost lost all track of. And who knows, someone may already be in your network at that point, exfiltrating data and getting ready to cost you millions when you end up getting sued. So it's you definitely want to have security in mind from the very beginning, if you can help it, for sure.
Absolutely. Now, Aaron, I know that we can reach you on LinkedIn. Do you have any other social media that you'd like to plug, or is that basically it for you?
That's basically it for me at this point.
Well, definitely make sure to check out Aaron Hutson on LinkedIn. Aaron, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you all for listening. If you really enjoyed the topics we covered today, you want to learn how to leap from on-prem to the cloud, make sure to access sans.org/cloud, which has a lot of great tools, cheat sheets, and more to help you on your journey to become a security analyst, engineer, architect, manager, or DevOps professional. And no one grows up thinking they're going to be a cloud security professional. No one thinks that. And it takes time to transition. No one grew up thinking they wanted to be an on-prem security professional, but now you have to go to that point and then translate those concepts. And it's something that no one is born to do, but anyone is capable to do if they have the motivation and interest. So I really appreciate you for coming to today's SANS Cloud ACE session.
And I thank you for having me.